Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to recreate this beautiful ongoing community of readers and artists and interpreters and commentators and struggling human beings that we all are, trying to make meaning in our lives and in the world around us. We are in Torah portion Vayera, which is found in the book of Genesis, chapter 18, beginning with its very first verse. We'll go ahead and read through the English translation of our Torah portion. I'll share with you a bit of a focus study about it. Then we'll open it up for our collaborative, collective conversation about it. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute it this time, we can join together in the recitation of the blessing, giving thanks for this moment. Baruch atah
Adonai
Eloheinu
melech haolam
asher
kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu ba'asot b'divrei Torah.
Thank you, God, for this opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. I'll share with you the opening verses, and then I'll invite others to have an opportunity to read as well. So we begin with chapter 18, the book of Genesis, verse 1. Adonai appeared to him by the terebinths of Mamre. He was sitting at the entrance of the tent as the day grew hot. Looking up, he saw 3 men standing near him. As soon as he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to greet them, and bowing to the ground, he said, "My lords, if it please you, do not go on past your servant. Let a little water be brought. Bathe your feet and recline under the tree. And let me fetch a morsel of bread that you may refresh yourselves. Then go on, seeing that you have come your servant's way." They replied, "Do as you have said." Kath, would you like to read starting at verse 6?
Thanks, Rabbi. Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, "Quick, 3 seahs of choice flour, knead and make cakes." Then Abraham ran to the herd, took a calf, tender and choice, and gave it to a servant boy who hastened to prepare it. Took curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set these before them, and he waited on them under the tree as they ate.
Thank you. And Richard, would you like to read starting at verse 9?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. They said to him, "Where's your wife Sarah?" And he replied, "There, in the tent." Then one said, "I will return to you when life is due, and your wife shall have a son." Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. Sarah had stopped having the periods of women, and Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "Now that I'm with her, am I to have enjoyment with my husband, so old?" Then the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh, saying, 'Shall I in truth bear a child, old as I am?' Is anything too wondrous for the Lord? I'll return to you at the time that life is due, and Sarah will have a son." Sarah dissembled, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was frightened. He replied, "But you did laugh."
Thank you. And Sherry, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 16?
Thank you, Rabbi. The men set out from there and looked down toward Sodom, Abraham walking with them to see them off. Now the Lord had said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do, since Abraham is to become great and populous nation, and all the nations of the earth are to bless themselves by him? For I have singled him out, that he may instruct his children and his posterity to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is just and right, in order that the Lord may bring about for Abraham what he had promised him." Then the Lord said, "The outrage of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin so grave. I will go down to see whether they have acted altogether according to the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will take note."
Thank you. Steve, you want to read a little bit starting at verse 22?
Oh, sure. Thank you. The men went on from there to Sodom, while Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Abraham came forward and said, will you sweep away the innocent along with the guilty? What if there should be 50 innocent within the city? Will you then wipe out the place and not for good for the sake of the innocent 50 who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to bring death upon the innocent as well as the guilty, so that innocent and guilty fare alike. For be it from you, shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly? And the Lord answered, if I find within the city of Sodom 50 innocent ones, I will forgive the whole place for their sake.
Thank you, Steve. Anna, do you want to read a little bit starting at verse 27?
Thanks. And again, Abraham spoke. Look now, let me undertake to speak up to my Lord, though I am but dust and ashes. What if the 50 innocent are 5 short? Will you destroy the whole city because of 5? God answered, if I find 45 there, I will not destroy it. Once more, Abraham spoke up. Well, what if 40 are found? And God answered, for the sake of 40, I will not do it. Then he said, do not be angry, my Lord, and let me speak. What if 30 are found there? If I find 30 there, said God, I will not do it. And Abraham said, well, look now, let me undertake to speak up before my Lord. What if 20 are found there? And God said, for the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. Then Abraham said, let not my Lord be angry, and let me speak up one last time. What if 10 are found there? And God said, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. Then, done speaking to Abraham, the Eternal departed, and Abraham returned to his place.
Thank you. Joni, do you want to do any reading?
Sure.
Okay, we're at the start of chapter 19.
2 angels arrived in Sodom in the evening, as Lot was sitting at the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to greet them, and bowing low and with his face to the ground, he said, please, my lords, turn aside to your servant's house to spend the night and bathe your feet. Then you may be on your way early. But they said, no, we will spend the night in the square. But he urged them strongly, so they turned his way and entered his house. He prepared a feast for them and baked unleavened bread, and they ate.
Thank you, Joni. And Steve, Breton, would you like to read starting at verse 4 of chapter 19?
Thank you, Rabbi. They had yet to lie down when the townspeople, the people of Sodom, young and old alike, all the people from every side gathered around the house and called to Lot, saying, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out so we can have them. Lot went out to them at the entrance and shut the door behind him. He said, please, brothers, do no evil. Look, I have 2 daughters who have never been intimate with a man. Let me bring them out for you and do to them as you please. But do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof. But they said, get out of the way. And they said, this fellow comes here to stay a while, and now he wants to act the judge. Well, we will make it worse for you than for them. They pressed the man Lot hard as they advanced to break down the door. But the men reached out and pulled Lot toward them into the house and shut the door, striking every one of the men, large and small, who were near the entrance of the house with a blinding light, so that they were unable to find the entrance.
Thank you so much, Steve. Let me invite Paul. Would you like to read starting at verse 12?
Thank you, Rabbi. Then the men said to Lot, whom else do you have here? A son-in-law, your sons, or your daughters? All that you have in the city, remove from this place. For we are about to destroy this place. And for their outcry has become great before Hashem. So Hashem has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, and he betrothed of his daughters and said, "Get up and leave this place, for Hashem is about to destroy the city." But he seemed like a jester in the eyes of his sons-in-law.
Thank you so much. Let me invite Martin, if you'd like to read starting at verse 15.
Thank you, Rabbi. As dawn broke, the angels urged Lot on, saying, "Up, take your wife and your two remaining daughters, lest you be swept away because of the iniquity of the city." Still he delayed. So the men seized his hand and the hands of his wife and his two daughters, in the Lord's mercy on him, and brought him out and left him outside the city. When they had brought him outside, one said, "Flee for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the hills, lest you be swept away." But Lot said to them, "Oh no, my lord, you have been so gracious to your servant, and have already shown me so much kindness in order to save my life, but I cannot flee to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Look, that town there is near enough to flee to. It is such a little place. Let me flee there. It is such a little place. Let my life be saved." He replied, "Very well, I will grant you this favor too, and I will not annihilate the town of which you have spoken. Hurry, flee there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there." Hence the town came to be called Zohar.
Thank you so much, Martin. And Jim, would you like to read starting at verse 23?
Thank you, Rabbi. As the sun rose upon the earth and Lot entered Zoar, Adonai rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah sulfurous fire from Adonai out of heaven. He annihilated those cities and the entire plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities and the vegetation of the ground. Lot's wife looked back, and she thereupon turned into a pillar of salt. Next morning, Abraham hurried to the place where he had stood before Adonai and looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and all the land of the plain. He saw the smoke of the land rising like the smoke of a kiln. Thus it was that when God destroyed the cities of the plain and annihilated the cities where Lot dwelt, God was mindful of Abraham and removed Lot from the midst of the upheaval.
Thank you so much, Jim. Dave, would you like to read starting at verse 30?
Lot went up from Zoar and settled in the hill country with his two daughters, for he was afraid to dwell in Zoar. He and his two daughters lived in a cave. As the older one said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to consort with us the way of all the world. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and let us lie with him, that we may maintain life through our father." That night they made their father drink wine, and the older one went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she rose. The next day the older one said to the younger, "See, I lay with father last night. Let us make him drink wine tonight also, and you go and lie with him, that we may maintain life through our father." That night also they made their father drink wine, and the younger one went and lay with him. He did not know when she lay down or when she rose. Thus the two daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. The older one bore a son and named him Moab. He is the father of the Moabites today. And the younger also bore a son, and she called him Ben Ammi, and he is the father of the Ammonites of today.
Thank you so much. And Robert, would you like to read at the very start of chapter 20?
Yes, thank you. And Abraham journeyed from thence toward the south country and dwelled between Kadesh and Shur and sojourned in Gerar. And Abraham said of Sarah, his wife, "She is my sister." And Abimelech king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. And God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, Behold, thou art a dead man, for the woman which thou hast taken, for she is a man's wife. But Abimelech had not come near her, and he said, Lord, wilt thou slay also a righteous nation? Said he not unto me, She is my sister? And she herself said, He is my brother. In the integrity of my heart and innocency of my hands have I done this. And God said unto him in a dream, Yea, I know that thou didst this in the integrity of thy heart, for I also withheld thee from sinning against me. Therefore suffered I thee not to touch her. Now therefore restore the man his wife, for he is a prophet, and he shall pray for thee, and thou shalt live. And if thou restore her not, know thou that thou shalt surely die, thou and all that are thine.
Thank you so much, Robert. And Robin, would you like to read starting at verse 8?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. When Abimelech woke up early in the morning, he summoned all his retainers and drummed the whole story into their ears, and they became filled with fear. He then summoned Abraham and said to him, What have you done to us? How had I sinned against you that you brought a great sin upon me and my kingdom? You did things to me that should not be done. Abimelech said to Abraham, What were you thinking of that you did this? Abraham replied, I thought, there is no fear of God at all in this place, and they will kill me for my wife. And as a matter of fact, she is my sister, my father's daughter, though not my mother's daughter, so she became my wife. And when God made me wander from my father's house, I said to her, Do this kindness for me. Wherever we go, say of me, He is my brother.
Thank you so much. Catherine, would you like to read starting at verse 14?
Thank you, Rabbi. Abimelech took sheep and oxen and male and female slaves and gave them to Abraham, and he restored his wife Sarah to him. And Abimelech said, Here, my land is before you, settle wherever you please. And to Sarah he said, I herewith give your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. This will serve you as vindication before all who are with you, and you are clear before everyone. Abraham then prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his slave girls so that they bore children. For the Lord had closed fast every womb of Abimelech because of Sarah, the wife of Abraham.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Justin, would you like to read the very start of chapter 21?
Thank you, Rabbi. And the Lord remembered Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had spoken. And Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham named his son, who had been born to him, whom Sarah had borne to him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. And Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made joy for me. Whoever hears will rejoice over me. And she said, Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? For I have borne a son to his old age. And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, making merry. And Sarah said to Abraham, drive out this handmaid and her son, for the son of this handmaid shall not inherit with my son, with Isaac. But the matter greatly displeased Abraham concerning his son. God said to Abraham, be not displeased concerning the lad and concerning your handmaid. Whatever Sarah tells you, hearken to her voice, for Isaac will be called your seed. But also the son of the handmaid, I will make into a nation because he is your seed.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Let me invite David and Susan, if you'd like to pick up there at verse 14.
And Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar, placing them on her shoulder. And he gave her the child and sent her away. And she went wandering through the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she flung the child under one of the bushes and went off and sat down at a distance, a bowshot away, for she thought, let me not see when the child dies. And she sat at a distance and raised her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the lad, and God's messenger called out from the heavens and said to her, what troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the lad's voice where he is.
Get up, carry the boy and hold him up in your hand, because I shall make him into a big nation. And God opened her eyes, and she saw a water well. She went and filled the bottle with water and had the boy drink. And God was with the boy, and he grew, and he lived in the wilderness, and he was a bowman. And he lived in the Paran wilderness, and his mother took him a wife from the land of Egypt. And it was at that time, and Abimelech had Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, saying, God is with you in everything that you do. And now swear to me here by my God that you won't act falsely to me and to my offspring and to my posterity. Like the kindness that I've done with you, you'll do with me and with the land in which you've resided. And Abraham said, I'll swear. And Abraham criticized Abimelech about a water well that Abimelech's servants had seized. And Abimelech said, I don't know who did this thing. And also, you didn't tell me. And also, I didn't hear of it before today. And Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave to Abimelech. And the two of them made a covenant. And Abraham stood 7 ewes of the sheep by themselves. And Abimelech said to Abraham, what are these 7 ewes that you've stood by themselves? And he said, because you take these 7 ewes from my hand, so that it will be evidence for me that I dug this well. On account of this, he called the place Beersheba, because the two of them swore and made a covenant in Beersheba. And Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, got up and went to the land of the Philistines. And he planted a tamarisk in Beersheba, and he called the name of Yahweh El Olam. And Abraham resided in the land of the Philistines many days.
Thank you so much, both of you. And Mark Thompson, would you like to read at the very start of chapter 22?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi, and good evening. Sorry, I'm late.
Good evening.
Sometime afterward, Adonai put Abraham to the test. He said to him, Abraham, and he answered, here I am. And he said, take your son, your favored one, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the heights that I will point out to you. So early next morning, Abraham saddled his ass and took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. He split the wood for the burnt offering, and he set out for the place of which Adonai had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his servants, "You stay here with the ass. The boy and I will go up there. We will worship, and we will return to you." Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering, and he put it on his son Isaac. He himself took the firestone and the knife, and the 2 walked off together. Then Isaac said to his father, Abraham, "Father," and he answered, "Yes, my son." And he said, "Here are the firestone and the wood, but where is the sheep for the burnt offering?" And Abraham said, "God will see to the sheep for his burnt offering, my son." And the 2 of them walked on together.
Thank you so much. Let me share the verses starting at verse 9. They arrived at the place of which God had told him. Abraham built an altar there. He laid out the wood. He bound his son Isaac. He laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And Abraham picked up the knife to slay his son. Then an angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." And he answered, "Here I am." And he said, "Do not raise your hand against the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your favored one, from me." When Abraham looked up, his eye fell upon a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering in place of his son. And Abraham named that site Adonai Yireh, whence the present saying, "On the mount of the Lord there is vision." Kath, would you like to read verse 15 on?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. The angel of Adonai called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, "By myself I swear," Adonai declares, "because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your favored one, I will bestow my blessing upon you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars of heaven and the sands on the seashore. And your descendants shall seize the gates of their foes. All the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by your descendants, because you have obeyed my command." Abraham then returned to his servants, and they departed together for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba. Sometime later, Abraham was told, "Milcah too has borne children to your brother Nahor, Uz the firstborn, and Buz his brother, and Kemuel the father of Aram, and Chesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jidlach, and Bethuel, Bethuel being the father of Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother, and his concubine, whose name was Reumah, also bore children, Tebah, Gaham, Tahash, and Ma'akah.
Thank you. And that's our entire Torah portion for the week. Thank you all, everyone, for your beautiful reading of a very compelling and dramatically filled Torah portion. I'd like to focus in our discussion at this moment on a very discrete part of our Torah portion, which is very complex and filled with all kinds of scenes and actions. Something happens at the very beginning of our Torah portion. It's either a visit or a visitation that occurs at the very beginning of chapter 18. And if you have a copy of the study sheet, I'd like to invite you to take it out now. Because I'd like to begin by focusing not at first on the text that we've read, but on the painting that I'm sharing with you. This is a painting by an artist named Yare Ostavani. Yare Ostavani is an artist who was born in Iran in 1962, and he came to the United States in 1978. at the age of 16 in order to study art. And he eventually got his master's in fine art in San Francisco. And he adopted as his particular genre of painting that of abstract expressionism, even though by this point in time, most artists had moved beyond abstract expressionism and had begun to explore other forms of art, and indeed had in some ways revived representational art. And for Yari Ostavani, though, he was intrigued, I think, by abstract expressionism as a way to give expression to something other than what the eye sees, but something that one experiences through other senses. And so this is what really intrigued me about Yari Ostavani for a number of reasons. One, because he has embraced his home here in the United States, and he also carries with him a deep fondness for Persian culture. He exhibits both in the United States and he exhibits also in Iran. He is, as he will describe himself, a traveler among and between cultures. And in his statement about his artwork, he says this, that he's searching for what he calls the eternal light, that which is a self-generating light rather than the one coming from an external source. And he's implying here the idea that there is a spiritual light, a spiritual energy other than the optical reality that we see. And he goes on to say, I approach painting as the visual evidence of, and not a report on, an experience, not a representation of spiritual energy, but a translation of it into light and texture, navigating the space between stasis and movement, between emergence and disappearance. And then he goes on to talk about how he paints. And he says that he pushes and moves paint until the distinctions between the foreground and the background and the spatial hierarchy begin to melt away and disappear, and the ephemeral begins to merge. Well, if you look at his work here called Rumi Shams, you can see what he's talking about in terms of the light that seems to be coming from deep within this canvas, that seems to be emerging. And if you look at how he has laid or moved around the paint that's on the canvas, one can see that he's beginning to blur what's in the background and what's in the foreground, and exploring, if you will, what dimensions may exist between what's in the foreground and what's in the background. This particular painting, Rumi Shams, is part of a whole series of paintings he did called The Third Script. The Third Script is a reference to a bit of writing by an 13th century Sufi, a dervish, a Shamsi of Tabrizi. And this is an encounter that happened between the man that we've come to know as Rumi, the 13th century Persian Sufi and mystic and poet, and the dervish Shamsi of Tabrizi in, we think, the year 1244. And this event, this encounter between Rumi and Shamsi Tabrizi had a tremendous impact on Rumi, and according to our artist Ostavani, really is what unleashed within Rumi his capacity to write poetry. And it unleashed it in a way that was incandescent and fiery and full of passion. Our dervish, Shamsi Tabrizi, wrote this. He wrote, "The writing comes in 3 scripts, one that he alone can read, one that he and others can read, and one that neither he nor anyone else can read. I am that third script." our artist says that this encounter between Rumi and Shamsi Tabrizi constituted a third script. It was, they found something within each other, which is in a sense indescribable, but is deeply felt. Something that opens up a whole new dimension to each other and to themselves individually. So this is what I think is intriguing to our artist, Ostavani, is this, what exists besides you, me, and indeed what exists besides you, me, and the two of us together. There is some other presence, which when the encounter is proper and ethical and appropriate, can unleash that other dimension, that other presence, which transforms all those who are involved. So I'm intrigued by this painting for many reasons. It's beautiful, it's full of passion, it's full of fire, it's full of light. It hints at other dimensions that exist. It's a blurring of boundaries between foreground and background. And I'm also intrigued by the story behind it, the influence behind it, this notion of a third script. So I'd like to pursue a little bit in just the next few minutes, this notion of thirds, of what might be existing here. And I'm also intrigued because this year when I read this Torah portion, I understood it the way the artist Ostavani is describing what he's interested in painting, which is not a report on what one sees, but it is rather an attempt to give visual evidence of an experience. So I'd like to suggest that this is the way I read this Torah portion this year, that it's not so much a story that's telling us what happened. It's really in word form, painting a picture of an experience. And that's what I'd like to pursue in the next few minutes. What exactly is this experience that these words are painting a picture of? So if on the study sheet, number 2, we have our opening verses. God appeared to Abraham by the terebinths of Mamre as he sat at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 Anashim, men, were standing near him. He saw them, and he ran from the entrance of the tent to meet them and bowed down. He said, Adonai, if I have found favor in your eyes, please do not pass on from your servant. Let me send for some water so that you may bathe your feet and rest under the tree. God said, the outrage of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great. So I share those verses with you, which goes all the way. I've shared with you excerpts from verses 1 all the way through 20, because I want to explore whether, when we're looking at those set of verses, are we looking at 3 separate incidents, that is, God appearing to Abraham, and then 3 men appearing to Abraham, and then Abraham having a re-encounter with God where they talk about Sodom and Gomorrah? Or is this, as our artist perhaps is hinting at, there's a blurring of what's going on. And within that blurring, we begin to see the possibilities of what he calls the third script, some kind of new experience that is beyond the individual characters that are being mentioned. And that there is some light that evolves and emerges out of this experience. It is confusing because it says God appeared to Abraham, and when Abraham looks up, it seems that he doesn't see God, he sees 3 men. So then again, the question is, well, what happened to God? Is God, in fact, does God appear to Abraham as 3 men after having first had some other level of experience of God. And then when he opens his eyes, optically, he sees three men. And then where do the three men go and what happens with this later encounter with God? It is confusing because when it says, Abraham said, Adonai, is now Abraham referring to God as Adonai and saying, please don't leave, let me attend to these others? Or is the Adonai referring to the three Anashim, the three men who have appeared? So a lot of commentary plays with these notions about how ambiguous and blurring this experience is for Abraham. And if you turn over the study sheet, there is in the Talmud, in the volume that deals with Shabbat, a reference to this notion about what does it mean when one encounters visitors, as Abraham is encountering them here. And it's going to refer to the verses that we've just read. So first we have the Mishnah, the early rabbinic writing that was reduced to writing about the year 200 CE. And the Mishnah says, one is allowed to remove 4 or 5 bundles of straw to make room for guests on Shabbat and to prevent people from leaving because of overcrowding. So this is a very simple rule. What happens if you set the table and then more people show up? Is it okay to move things on Shabbat in order to make room for more people? And so the answer here is yes, you can remove 4 or 5 bundles of straw to make room for more guests. Now, and interestingly enough, the mission is concerned not just with those who have newly arrived, but also with those who are already there. Because you want to not only accommodate new people, you want to make sure the people that have already been there don't get up and say, oh, we're going to leave so these new people can have room here. You want to be able to do enough to be able to expand the universe that's in your home to accommodate everyone. And then, of course, our Gemara, our commentary that was reduced to writing about the year 500 CE, is going to be playing with this notion about guests. So first we have Rabbi Yehuda, who says in the name of Rab, welcoming guests, and here in Aramaic it's orchim, orchin, welcoming guests is greater than receiving the face of the Shekhinah.
My favorite.
As it is written, my lords, if it please you, please do not go past your servant. Then Rabbi Elazar says, see how the ways of the Holy One are not like the ways of flesh and blood. Our custom would never allow a child to tell his elder, wait until I return to you. While we see that the Holy One did wait until Abraham went to serve food to the guests, as it is written, my lords, if it please you, do not go past your servant. Now here in general, we're getting a notion about how important it is to treat guests appropriately and to welcome them into one's home. But interestingly enough, what we've just read takes it from 2 different points of view. The first one, that is Rabbi Yehuda, is really focusing on Abraham's perspective on the whole thing, where it says, please, my lords, do not go past your servant. Rabbi Elazar, on the other hand, uses the same verses and instead is now focusing on God's point of view, because God decides, you know what? It's okay for me to wait until Abraham deals with these new guests. So the same words are now used by 2 different rabbis to explore 2 different points of view about the whole situation. So this notion about a guest is what also began to intrigue me, because I wondered, well, what exactly is a guest? Is it someone that we invite into our home for dinner and say, please come up to my home for Shabbat dinner? I'd love to see you. And oh, by the way, if you can send an RSVP, that would be very nice too. So I'll know exactly how many places to set. This notion about, first of all, how important a guest is something that we recite in our daily liturgy, in the morning liturgy. We have here in number 4, Elu Devarim She'ein Lahem Shiur, which is actually from the Mishnah. These are things that are so important to do. We can't even begin to measure their value. And one of them is Hachnasat Orchim, welcoming the guest. Well, I was exploring the notion, well, okay, what is a guest? So I looked at the Hebrew, and the basis for the noun orchim, guest, comes from the Hebrew verb arach, which means to wander or journey. And orach is a path, and orcha is a caravan. So now I have a bit of a nuance that, well, maybe a guest is not necessarily someone that we intentionally invite into our home. Maybe what's being talked about as orchim are people that appear, perhaps even without an express invitation. They appear at our home. They appear as wanderers. They are on a journey. They're part of a caravan. They're wandering by. And when they come by, how we treat them can have quite different consequences in our lives. So now I'd like to just begin to draw my part of our discussion to a conclusion by focusing on this notion of the third script and this notion about thirds. Because I'd like to suggest that what we've been reading in chapter 18 is divided up into 3 parts. The first is verse 1, God appears to Abraham. Then in verse 2, Abraham meets 3 guests. And then in verses 17 all the way through 33, there's a dialogue between God and Abraham about Sodom and Gomorrah. And I want to suggest that what's happening here is an encounter, an experience that Abraham is open to, that he welcomes into his life. And in the course of it, this first appearance of God into Abraham's life then evolves and morphs into an actual, perhaps, encounter with 3 beings whom he handles appropriately. And then this notion, this dialogue between God and Abraham, Sodom and Gomorrah, is a reflection of how Abraham has been transformed as a result of his welcoming in this experience, this encounter of 3 wayfarers who have come his way. And the fact that he has handled them appropriately transforms him. And now he becomes someone who is engaged in a kind of slightly combative dialogue with God about, really? Unlike Noah, he's saying, really? You want to destroy everyone, even the innocent? Surely that's not the way of the just God. What if I found innocent people there? And there's this negotiation, as Kath was mentioning before we even started, this negotiation between God and Abraham, where perhaps God is testing Abraham at this point to see, are you going to be like Noah and just let everyone die? Or are you going to stand up and fight with me about what's right? And we see what transpires. So this notion about what is a guest is not merely, I want to suggest, an actual physical person who shows up at your home. It can also be an experience. It can be something that we experience internally, not just externally. That seems to be what our artist is also intrigued by. Our artist, Yare Ostavani, he's interested in not just when we see optically outside of ourselves, but what we see inside of ourselves, because that, he says, is what the true eternal light is all about. So here is a poem by Rumi, called the guest house. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. And with that, I'd love to hear what you experienced as we read through this week's Torah portion. If you'd like to raise your hand, I'd love to call on you. Richard.
You moved me because I thought about how we treat the displaced and what a boon it might be to reflect on what's going on in our streets. And also, I've been reading a lot about the massacre of Indians. And there was a famous chief who had dreams. And when he woke and was still in the dream, that was when he had his most power. And so I can see that Abraham is in the sun. It's a hot day, and he has an experience, a dream, a hallucination, whatever it is. But it speaks to who he is when his response is to get them water. And that gives God a clue. And I got a clue that, well, this whole thing about bargaining, God set it up. And what happened? He couldn't find a minion. And I think it's wonderful. And I learned as a child in the Depression, the farmers would come to the fence and see the vagabonds. Here they come, fat and lousy. Put them in the hay, the horses can't eat them, can't shoot them, law protects them. What are you going to do with them? Invite them for lunch. So it's interesting that this speaks to the event that's happening in this time of all these persons displaced. Motley crew, some have turned to drugs, some have turned to thievery, some have just trying to survive, some of them have run out of money. And one can say in part, well, it's a consequence of the shadow side of our democracy being revealed to us. And I think this speaks to it, exactly what you're saying, that no, this is an opportunity. So good luck with the new council.
Thank you, Richard. Let me invite Robert, and I'll get to Anna. Yes, and then Paul. Yes, go ahead, Robert.
Yes, thank you for a lovely evening. I just have a very brief comment about Rumi. My understanding, my wife is Persian, Manisha is Persian, and actually Baha'u'llah quotes Rumi from time to time, as well as Hafez and Sadi. And so that's a strong part of her culture, and I have some familiarity with it. But my understanding is the relationship between Rumi and Shamsi Tabriz was the highest form of human love. And in one of his poems, Rumi says, he ends it with, and speak no more of Shamsi Tabriz. So it's that high, high love that's pure. And so thank you so much for including this.
Thank you, Robert. God bless you. Thank you. And Anna, then Paul.
Also very briefly, but in response to Richard's comment about the wanderer who goes by and feeding people, my grandmother and grandpa had a farm about 2 miles out of town, 2 miles from the railroad track at least. And yet during the Depression, there would be people, men who would come by and knock at her back door and ask, if they could have food. And she always, she baked 16 loaves of bread twice a week or something. She just fed a lot of people on the farm, but she would always make them huge sandwiches. She would make them 2 really big sandwiches, and they would ask what they could do. And she said, well, I'll make you sandwiches and you can chop the kindling for the fire while I do. And so they had their dignity. They did a little bit of work for her, and she sent them on their way with a full stomach. And somehow in our town, and probably in many towns and all over the country and the world as it would be appropriate, these people left guideposts. They left markings to tell the people that come behind them how to get there. And I can't even imagine how that was.
And they kept you warm for the winter.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Thank you.
and thank you for the quote about hospitality.
Let me call upon Paul, and then Martin and Mark.
Yeah, 2 parts. One is about the painting, and then I want to say something about the chapter, the text. First of all, when I looked at the painting on my computer in color, and I tried to digest it, and I have a bad habit, because I remember when my sister first took me to the Brooklyn Museum of Art, and when she showed me my first piece of abstract art, and my comment was, in the corner, there was a face that looked like Mrs. Rabinowitz in apartment 3A. And that was the last time my sister took me to the Brooklyn Museum. It was up to me thereafter. But you could see the attitude I had about painting. So I did appreciate when you went through the painting and you gave your version. I didn't pull like I did to my sister. I actually appreciated what you said, and I saw the dip. But then something happened interesting. Because I'm a cheap so-and-so, when I made the print of that picture, it came out in black and white. And suddenly, when you look at the black and white picture, you're coming up with the 4th script, because now you see Mrs. Rabinowitz. I mean, that's the separate issue here. But there's a separately where you see there's across the painting, you actually see a complete lamb, where the stomach of the lamb looks like a forest. And then you see the complete lamb's face and everything. And then it looks like a tiger at right angles. And in the foot of the lamb, you see like an Easter Island, face. And so it really, here I was finally understanding abstract and not retreating. And now if you run the picture in black and white, all of a sudden, and then the stomach is suddenly you see a burning forest. I mean, as if every tree is clear. So if you just run that painting through, suddenly you see some other things. But on the other hand, maybe Martin could explain that part of it. But it is interesting if you look at a different wavelength, that you actually see maybe there is this old-fashioned caveman approach to art. It might have been something he did and then added on other things. Okay, now the text.
Okay.
I know, and it's not fair, but later on, there's a gentleman that Aaron appears. And then suddenly his 2 sons do something, and it doesn't even tell you too much about the 2 sons, what they did. But anyway, they get destroyed in the worst possible way in front of the father. I mean, it really bad. So now we go back to where we had, but that occurred to me when all of a sudden we're talking, and this is also now after a flood where everybody gets destroyed. So now we're now dealing with a God, or Abraham is dealing with a God, not knowing about Aaron, but knowing about that. And suddenly he's faced with the situation with his son. Well, Abraham is really stuck, because he's dealing with a guy that's pretty tough. I mean, he's really done a wipeout job. And now he's asking me, to do something with my son. It really, to me, is very scary as to, you bet it's a matter of what, there is, what is it here you're dealing with somebody who you have to be perfect with, because look what happened to Aaron's sons. Look what happened. What the heck is perfect? What are the sins that these people did that, justify this kind of destruction? And, you wonder about what you're being asked to do with connection with your son. Okay, that's my skeptical side.
So first of all, two quick comments. One, Paul, when you dream, do you dream in color or black and white?
Me, I never even thought. You asked me all these good questions. Never thought about it. I have troubles remembering dreams, but I will think about it.
Okay. And the other is what you just mentioned about Abraham and his son Isaac and being asked to sacrifice his son and all this. A different way to think about it is maybe it was not any external being that was asking him to do this. Maybe this was an internal, voice that he was saying, an internal urge that he was struggling with.
Oh, you're making it more of a problem for me now. I mean, they were kind of a yeah. Maybe.
Okay, but let me.
That's a bad way.
Let me call upon. Well, this is a book of struggle, right? This is not a book that lays it out for you about exactly. This is an evidence of struggle that's going on with all these characters. So one question to think about is the struggle coming because of demands that are being made of them by an external being and an external character, an external voice, or is this revealing things that are going on not only inside of them, but things that are going on inside each one of us all the time? So let me call upon Martin and then Mark, and then I'll get back to some other people as well.
Thank you. I'm struggling with the text, and I just have a few questions about it, to understand what the scholars understand about the text. So you start with God talking to Abraham, and then they immediately go to the three visitors, the three caravan, whoever they are. But the way in which he treats them, of course, there's an old tradition of Eastern church tradition of being hospitable to the stranger. But this seems much more than that. It really seemed like he was aware that they were messengers from God or something like that. And I believe the way I read the text, the messengers tell him that he's going to have a son. So these aren't ordinary people. So these are clearly angels, and that Abraham must perceive this. So, but it isn't totally clear. And then the other thing that really I found confusing is the angels that come to Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah.
And Lot is willing to give his unblemished daughters to them rather than them harming strangers. Well, that doesn't really make much sense unless he's aware that they're angels. And if they're angels, he doesn't have to protect them. So it's really confusing. If he's aware of their divinity or of their godliness or whatever, messengers of God, he doesn't have to worry about townspeople harming them. So, and the light drove them away. So it really didn't make any sense to me. So I'm just confused.
Okay, so here's a couple of clues as to way at least some traditional commentary reads the two experiences that you're highlighting, which is first that those beings who appear to Abraham, the text calls them anashim, men, human beings. And so from that, a lot of the commentary says Abraham did not know that they were divine beings. It's an indication that he saw them as human beings and treated them so graciously. Whereas when we get to the story with Lot, it says Shnei Hamalachim, two angels.
Okay.
And so that allows commentators then to say Lot knew they were angels. And so he went above and beyond to treat them knowing that they're angels. And as if you remember when it came time for Abraham and Lot to go their separate ways because there was too many, their herds were too big to occupy the same land. And Abraham said, look, you choose. you choose where you want your herds to graze, and I'll go somewhere else. And it says that Lot chose the best land. So you get here the sense of the character of Lot as someone who chooses what's going to be best for him, rather than what's going to be best for other people. So those are some of the differences that are happening in those two episodes. But thank you so much for pointing that out.
Giving up his daughters to protect the angels, is that best for him?
Well, he sees them, if you go with that bit of commentary, he sees them as royalty, as I will do anything for these royalties, because maybe in the end I will get a better benefit out of it.
All right.
Okay.
So
Then
he's self-serving.
yeah, I would say so. The fact that he's living in Sodom and Gomorrah itself should indicate that his character is less than noble. Okay. So Mark Thompson, and then we'll get to Justin.
Thanks. First of all, Paul, I have to, I always get such a wonderful, every time you bring out a childhood experience, it's really wonderful. And the Mrs. Rabinowitz story reminded me of a childhood experience. And it has, I think, a little bit to do with the third script you were talking about, Rabbi, because on Yom Kippur, I was probably maybe not even a bar mitzvah. Rabbi Kelter in the First Congregational Church gave a sermon about the Akedah, about the sacrifice of Isaac. And what made it so powerful and such an impression on a kid was that he talked about the Akedah, the sacrifice, from the standpoint of Isaac, how Isaac must have felt. And being a kid, you could certainly relate to this. And it was just a powerful memory. But I also wanted to talk about the thirds because, this idea of thirds appearing, if you look at that particular portion, it was on the third day that Abraham looked up and he saw the place from the altar. And they had the firestone, they had the wood, they needed a third thing, they needed the sheep for the burnt offering. So here we have another example of thirds playing a part in this portion. But anyway, just bringing out these childhood memories to me is a very powerful thing. And I want to thank you, Paul, in particular for that.
Thanks so much, Mark. And Justin.
Thank you. I'm hoping I'm not going to speak out too far out of the line, but to just first of all to thank you for having addressed the beginning of this parsha, because it is truly mysterious to me. But I liken it to the sense that perhaps a humility of Abraham Avinu, that even if his concept of the divine, he's in the present, the divine is present before him, to say this may not be the real divine, the divine may be coming in the form of these guests. There seems to be such so much of a sense of self-effacement, of even being in the presence of the divine, and then sacrificing that in a sense for the sake of maybe this is what comes in. I do have a sense that, maybe I'm wrong about this, but it's like that even engaged in prayer, it's really important to be able to greet the neighbor who comes in. No matter how close to that. So I guess that's where I'm really moved to wonder about the beginning of Vayera.
What you got me to think about, Justin, is something that the founder of Hasidic Judaism, the Baal Shem Tov, would say about visitors during prayer. That sometimes when we pray, he says, we have these urges, these seemingly inappropriate thoughts that enter into our minds during these moments of prayer. Now, are they temptations to distract us, or are they feelings and thoughts that have been liberated from dark recesses in us because we're entering into moments of prayer? And the Baal Shem Tov says what one should do when these thoughts of whether they're sexual thoughts or selfish thoughts, whatever they might be, come up during prayer, you should say to them, how nice to see you. I'm so glad you're here. Let me attend to you at an appropriate moment. I'm glad that you have felt welcomed into my home, and I will be with you shortly. Please don't pass by. Stay here. I will get you some food. I'll get you some water as soon as I've finished my prayer. That's what you got me to thinking. So thank you for that, Justin. Kath, did you?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. I was pondering the different gifts of women that are occurring in this, in that Abraham twice has offered Sarah up, once when she was Sarai and then when she was Sarah, as a mitigation. And the enlightenment in this one, that actually this is where we find out that she's actually his half sister. But it still seems like whether she's his half sister or his wife, who is also his half sister, he's still offering her up, which to me seems dicey. And then we have Lot offering up his daughters to those he's giving shelter to in his home, yet he gives his daughters shelter in his home. So there's this judgment between who has more value, because the daughters are also sheltered in the home. And I just wondered if there's any wisdom, rabbi wisdom lurking around with this.
Oh, good question.
Well, here's what you got me to think about, Kath. You got me to think this, which is, here's Abraham, who in the opening up of our Torah portion has this incredible experience, has his experience of God entering into his life, and then is transformed thereby to be able to have an argument with God, a negotiation with God, rises to a higher level, certainly than Noah had ever reached, to have a challenge with God. And then we have the episode with, once again, it's a repetition, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the second time he's done this, where he passes off Sarah as his sister to save himself. And so one thinks, my gosh, you had this incredible experience, Abraham, where you experienced God. And why can't you maintain that level of righteousness and enlightenment and insight throughout your whole life? Now that you've had that, why do you fall back down into this lower level that you had previously of passing your wife off to some other guy in order to save yourself? And so the answer that what Torah seems to be telling us is, it's never going to be only upward. It's going to be upward and downward, and then hopefully upward again, and then most likely downward again. This is the way it's going to be for us as human beings. And so hopefully we will fortify ourselves enough with our elevation that the downward won't be either as often or as steep a decline. And certainly that we will be able to surround ourselves with a community engaged in spiritual practice where we'll be able to support one another. And that's what I want to just give thanks for in our closing moment here, to give thanks for, I'm so grateful to be part of a spiritual community that sustains me in my inevitable declines. You help bring me back up, and I'm so grateful for that. And God bless you all. I look forward to our regathering next time. Thank you very much. Be well, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Baruch Hashem.